There is a statistic almost no one talks about because almost no one was allowed to count it. Between 1961 and 1974, I read 41 debrief transcripts from people who reported being taken. 32 of them described missing time, hours gone, blank, but 9 of them, 9 remembered everything, every minute, every surface, every word that wasn't spoken out loud. And here is the part that kept me awake for 50 years. By 1976, all 9 of those files had been pulled, not the 32 with the gaps, just the 9 who remembered. Why would anyone go to the trouble of erasing the testimony of the only people who could actually testify? I'm Frank Delgado, 30 years in Air Force intelligence, and I retired a colonel. In 1958, I signed a paper before they'd tell me what it covered, and I kept it for 68 years. My wife died without ever hearing a word of it. Everyone who signed those papers is gone now, so I'm going to tell it. I want to start not with the beings and not with the people, but with the paper. Because the paper is what I can vouch for personally. I held those transcripts. Standard debrief format. Subject name, date, location, interviewing officer, medical annex clipped to the back. They read like accident reports. Flat, procedural, which is exactly why they were so hard to dismiss. The 32 with missing time, those got studied, categorized, filed, forgotten. Routine, if you can believe there's a routine for such a thing. But the 9 full recall cases were handled differently from the first page. Different classification stamp, different routing. And over the years, those 9 people were revisited, not by us, by whatever took them the first time. That's the subject of this video. What happens to the ones who remember everything? What the beings did to them in their own words, pulled from files that were never supposed to be read out loud. I'm going to walk you through it carefully, one case in full, then the pattern across the rest. I am not going to embellish because I don't need to. The transcripts were frightening enough exactly as typed. Let me tell you exactly what one of the 9 said he saw. Not the buildup, not the context, the moment itself. His file identified him as a radar maintenance technician. I'll call him Martin because his family may still be living and his real name stays with me. The date on the debrief was March of 1962. Northern Tier Base, high plains, the kind of posting where winter lasts 7 months and the sky at night is the biggest thing in your life. Martin was driving back from a remote radar annex around 1 in the morning. 2-lane road, no traffic, engine running fine, then the engine wasn't running at all. He described it precisely, and not sputtering out, not dying gradually. He said, and I'm quoting the transcript from memory because I read it more times than I can count. It was like the truck forgot it was a truck. The headlights stayed on for a few seconds, then they dimmed, the way a flashlight dims, and went out, and the road ahead of him was lit anyway. He got out. He said he doesn't know why he got out. That in the debrief, he kept returning to that point, bothered by it. A man alone at 1 a.m. with a dead vehicle does not step out into a light source he can't identify. But he did. He said it felt like remembering an appointment. The light was coming from above and slightly ahead, and here's the first detail that stopped me cold when I read it. Martin said the light cast no shadows. He was standing in it. His truck was standing in it, and nothing on that road had a shadow. He looked down at his own boots specifically to check. That's an odd thing to do in a moment of terror, and it's exactly the kind of thing a trained radar technician would do. Verify the anomaly. It's not the detail someone invents. It's the detail someone remembers. Then the beings were there, not walking up. There, 3 of them. He put their height at just under 4 feet, gray skin, but he corrected the interviewer on the word. He said gray was wrong, that it was closer to the color of wet clay, and that the skin looked waxy, like it would hold a fingerprint. Large heads. Eyes he described as black but not shiny. He said mirrors and glass reflect, and these didn't. He said looking at the eyes was like looking at holes. And one more detail. The interviewing officer asked about the hands. Martin said the fingers were long, 4 of them, and that each finger had faint banding, like rings under the skin, evenly spaced. Then he stopped and said something the stenographer typed in full. I don't know why I saw that. They were 20 feet away. but I saw it like it was an inch from my face. That detail, that specific, almost clinical observation, is the kind of thing that tends to stay with me. Because 2 of the other 8 full recall witnesses, interviewed in different years in different states by different officers, mentioned the banding on the fingers independently. The files never crossed. The witnesses never met. Martin said the middle being raised one hand and the road went away, not darkness, away. And the next thing he remembered was a curved room, pale, seamless, no visible light source, and being unable to move anything except his eyes. Now, in the missing time cases, this is where the account stops. The road goes away, and the next memory is the truck. 3 hours later, engine running. But Martin's account doesn't stop. Martin's account keeps going for 11 typed pages. And that is precisely what made him a problem. For them, and as I came to understand, for us. Here is what the available evidence, fragmentary, imperfect, but persistent, suggests happened on the clock that night. Martin signed out of the radar annex at 12:47 a.m. That's a shift log, ink on paper, initialed by the airman who relieved him. The drive back to base took 40 minutes in bad weather, 30 in good. The gate log shows him arriving at 4:52 a.m., so the paperwork says roughly 4 hours are unaccounted for. But Martin's own account of the encounter, told beginning to end in the debrief, covers, by his estimate and by the interviewing officer's reconstruction, about 35 minutes. He remembered everything, remembered it continuously, no seams, no jumps. 35 minutes of memory, 4 hours of clock. The officer pressed him on it. Martin didn't get defensive, he got quiet. The transcript notes a long pause, and then he said, "Then I remember everything they wanted me to remember." He caught it himself. The full recall witnesses weren't people the beings failed to blank. They were people the beings edited differently. The math says 4 hours, the memory says 35 minutes. That gap just sits there. It does not close when you look at it directly. And I want to add something from the medical annex, because it belongs here. Martin was examined 30 hours after the event. Behind his left ear, just above the mastoid, the flight surgeon noted a small, fresh, perfectly circular mark. Not a puncture, not a burn. The surgeon's exact words on the form were geometry inconsistent with injury, meaning wounds are messy. This wasn't a wound. This was placed. 7 of the 9 full recall files had a medical annex. 6 of the 7 noted a mark behind the left ear. 6 of 7. I want to be careful here. A mark proves nothing. A gap in a shift log proves nothing. But clusters in any investigation are the thing you can't afford to ignore. I spent 30 years being paid to notice when independent sources start agreeing on details they have no way of sharing. And these files agreed like a choir. I want to be careful here too, more careful than anywhere else in this video, because this is where we get to what the title promises, what was done to the ones who remembered. The 9 full recall files shared a second common feature, and it took me years to see it because it wasn't inside the debriefs. It was in the follow-up paperwork clip behind them. The 9 were taken again, all 9, repeatedly, on a schedule. The missing time witnesses, the 32, mostly reported one event. One night, one gap, done. Whatever happened to them, it was apparently finished, but the full recall witnesses reported return visits, and the intervals were not random. Martin was taken again in September of 1962, 6 months after the first event, then March of 1963, then September, every 6 months within a window of days for as long as his file stayed active. A nurse from a 1966 case in New Mexico, I'll call her Eleanor, same interval. A rancher from 1969, same interval. 6 months, give or take a week. The pattern repeats with a precision that is difficult to attribute to coincidence. It reads less like haunting and more like maintenance, like a follow-up appointment. And what happened during those return visits is where the transcripts get hard to read. Eleanor described it best, and I'm going to stay close to her words. She said that on the return visits, they didn't examine her body. They examined the memory. She was placed in that same pale, curved room, and images from her first encounter were, her word, played, not shown to her. Played through her, the way you'd run a tape to check it for damage. She said she could feel them moving through the recollection, stopping at certain moments, holding them, and then moving on. She said, quote, they were checking their work. Sit with that for a second, because it implies the memory itself was the work, not a byproduct of the abduction, the point of it. The rancher, I'll call him Delbert, reported something Eleanor also reported, again, with no possible contact between them. During the return visits, small pieces went missing, not pieces of the encounter, pieces of his ordinary life. He came back from the September 1970 visit and could not remember his mother's funeral. Knew it happened, knew the date, knew he'd been a pallbearer because his brother told him so. The event itself was gone, clean. Eleanor lost her wedding, not her marriage. She remembered her husband, remembered the years. The day itself was simply no longer in her. 2 of the other 9 reported similar losses. Ordinary memories, emotionally significant ones, removed with surgical edges while the encounter memories stayed vivid, fixed, untouchable. One witness told his interviewer, and this line I have never been able to put down, it's like they need the space. Now, each of these details, alone, is dismissible. Trauma disrupts memory. Grief disrupts memory. A mark behind the ear could be anything. I know every one of those explanations. I deployed several of them myself in official assessments, and I'm ashamed of some of what I signed. But the deeper I went into the timeline, the harder the innocent explanations were to hold. Trauma doesn't run on a 6-month calendar. Grief doesn't remove the funeral and leave the abduction in perfect focus. Coincidence doesn't put the same banded fingers into 3 transcripts that never touched. Something was managing these 9 people, curating them, and they knew it. That was the cruelest part of those files. Every one of the 9 understood sooner or later that remembering was not a mercy. It was an assignment they never applied for. There's a difference between a silence and an absence. A silence is when the record exists and nobody talks about it. I lived inside silences for 30 years. They're uncomfortable, but they're honest in their way. The paper is there. Somebody could, in principle, read it. An absence is different. An absence is when the paper is gone, and the system pretends it was never there. In 1974, the 9 full recall files were pulled. I know because I went looking for the Martin file to cross-reference a new case, and the drawer position was filled. That's the detail that still bothers me. They didn't leave a gap in the drawer. They closed it up, and the register showed a transfer notation. Forwarded per instruction, no destination, no instruction number, no receiving signature. In records handling, that combination is not sloppiness. Sloppiness leaves a mess. This left nothing, neatly. I made an inquiry through channels. The response took 11 weeks and said the material had been consolidated with related holdings and archived off-site. I asked which site. The answer was that retrieval was not supported at my access level. I was a colonel in intelligence with the original compartment clearance. There was no level above mine that had a reason to exist for those files, unless the files themselves were the reason. Years later, after I retired, I tried again as a private citizen. Formal request, correct format, correct citations. The reply said, no responsive records were located. Not withheld, not classified, located. 41 debriefs, 9 compartmented case files, medical annexes, photographs of 6 identical marks behind 6 left ears. And the official position of the United States government is that none of it can be found. I want to be precise about what I'm claiming, because precision is all I have left. I am not saying I know who pulled those files or why. I am saying that only the 9 were pulled. The 32 missing time cases sat in the same cabinets for decades. Some of them were even declassified in fragments, and researchers have chewed on them since. But the 9 people who remembered everything, the only witnesses whose testimony was complete, those are the ones the system swallowed. Ask yourself what that selection means. If this were all confusion and fantasy, the full recall cases would be the least sensitive, wouldn't they? Detailed stories are easy to pick apart. You erase the ones with gaps, the ambiguous ones, the deniable ones, unless the detailed ones were checked against something, unless somebody, somewhere, compared those 11 typed pages to information from another source and found that Martin was not confused at all. I am not making a claim. I'm asking a question, but the question, once asked, is very hard to put back down. At some point during the contacts, several of the 9 said the beings communicated something, not in words. All of them struggled with how to describe the mechanism. Eleanor called it being handed a thought that was already unwrapped. And what stayed with me is that 3 of them independently came away with versions of the same idea. Martin put it this way in his 1963 follow-up debrief, and I'm going to give you the passage as close to verbatim as 60 years of rereading it in my head allows. They made me understand that a person is not the body. The body is the container, a person is the memory, and memory is not a recording, it's a selection. Something chooses what stays. They wanted me to know that for most people, they are the something. The interviewing officer, to his credit, asked the obvious question, chooses for what purpose, and Martin said the concept he received was closest to the word keeping. Not keeping as in imprisonment, keeping as in the way a lighthouse has a keeper. He said the beings regarded certain memories in certain people the way we'd regard an instrument that has to stay calibrated. And the 9, the ones allowed to remember everything, were, in his understanding, the instruments kept. I have turned that word over in my mind many times. In 68 years, I have not found the bottom of it. Eleanor's version was gentler and worse at the same time. She said she was made to understand that what happened to the other 32, the blanking, was not concealment. It was, in her words, them cleaning up after themselves. Ordinary courtesy almost, the way you'd smooth the sand after walking a beach that isn't yours. But the 9 were not smoothed over. The 9 were footprints left on purpose. She asked them, however you ask a being like that anything, why her? And the answer she received, the unwrapped thought placed in her hands, was, so that the record exists somewhere they cannot reach. They, not we, they cannot reach. Now I sat with that line for a long time before I let myself follow it, because it leads somewhere uncomfortable. If the beings were storing complete memories inside human witnesses, deliberately, redundantly, on a maintenance schedule, then the memories were being protected from someone. And in 1974, someone pulled exactly those 9 files, 2 record-keeping systems. Theirs, written in living memory, checked every 6 months. Ours, written on paper, erased in an afternoon. And 9 ordinary Americans, a technician, a nurse, a rancher, 6 others whose faces I never saw, standing in the overlap, being maintained by one side and disappeared by the other. The rancher Delbert gave the bleakest version, and I'll end this section with it. His last recorded statement, 1971, closes with this: I asked them when it would stop, and they let me know it stops when I stop, that I'm the shelf the book sits on, and you don't ask a shelf how long it has to stand there. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and those 9 are not unique. After I retired, I started reading the civilian literature, the abduction researchers, the hypnotic regression cases, the material collected in living rooms and church basements by people with no clearance and no filing system. And buried in that mass of accounts, the same signature kept surfacing. A minority of experiencers who never lost time, who remembered continuously, who reported return visits at regular intervals. who describe small, clean holes in their ordinary memories, a graduation gone, a first day of school gone, while the encounters stayed in sharp focus. Different decades, different countries, investigators who had never seen our files, because nobody had, describing the pattern the 9 embodied. One prominent researcher, I won't name him, you can find him, he worked out of a university and was ridiculed for it, wrote in the 1990s that his full recall subjects seemed to be, and this is his phrase, curated rather than examined. And he had no access to anything I've described tonight. He arrived at the same word Martin used in 1963, curated. That kind of convergence across time and across walls that information does not cross is either the largest folklore coincidence I've ever encountered, or it's the same phenomenon being observed by people who don't know each other. In my profession, we had a rule about that. One source is a story. 2 sources are a coincidence. When the sources can't have collaborated and the details still locked together and banded fingers, 6-month intervals, the mark behind the left ear, memory losses with clean edges, you stop calling it a story. I tried in my last years of freedom of movement to find the 9. I owed them that. 4 I confirmed deceased. Natural causes, for whatever that phrase is worth, all of them dying within a 19-month window in the early 80s, which proves nothing and which I cannot stop thinking about. 2 I could never trace at all. The trail simply ends. No death record, no forwarding. The same neat nothing as the files. Eleanor I found. She was in her 90s in a care facility in the Southwest, and I sat with her for 2 afternoons. She knew who I was before I said a word about the files. She said, "You're the one who read them." I asked how she could know that. She said, "Because they told me someone would come. They keep the record, Colonel. They keep it better than you people ever did." And on the 2nd afternoon, near the end of my visit, she leaned toward me. She was frail, it cost her something to do it. And she said the visits had never stopped. 91 years old, in a locked memory care ward. And every 6 months, she said, the room goes pale and curved, and someone checks the work. I asked her what they check for now, after all these decades, what could possibly be left to maintain. And she smiled, not a happy smile, the other kind. And she said, "They're not maintaining it anymore, Frank. They're getting ready to collect it." Collect it. I asked her what that meant. When? Collected by whom? Into what? She looked past me at the window for a long time, long enough that I thought she'd drifted. And then she took my wrist with more strength than a woman that age should have, and she said, "You signed a paper once. So did I in my own way. Mine comes due first, but yours..." That was the last conversation I ever had with her. The facility called it a peaceful passing. 11 days later. And I have spent every night since trying to finish her sentence for her, because I think she was trying to tell me what happens when the keeping ends and the collecting begins. And I think she knew exactly how much time